One of the most intriguing stories of the last few months in Marvel Snap has been the rise of a unique Hela build popularized by one player at High Infinite. It's been on my tier lists over and over, and we are thrilled to be joined by that player for a full breakdown on this unique archetype, Denish Hela. So, Denish, welcome to the show. First things first, apologies for pronouncing your name 7 different ways. It's not personal. I've been doing the same thing to Esme Cuckoo. My comments keep telling me I'm getting that wrong consistently. They've given me 3 different pronunciations: cuckoo, cuckoo, and cuckoo. I'm devastated to report that I've only mispronounced your name one way, which is Denish.
I think it's cuckoo personally, but I've been told that's also wrong. I got no idea, man.
Yeah.
I just play the game.
And when you do, you've basically been playing this deck for, like, how many months? Just ballpark it for me, that you've been doing this Blink, Legion, Odin, Hela deck.
Well, I've played Hela since basically the game launched, but at one point they killed Lockjaw, so I've played this version since Blink dropped her, basically. So that's what, January? Around January, a year ago?
A year of dedication in the Hela mines is what we're talking about here. And what makes this deck unique is that when Hela is typically popular, it is popular in large part because of how easy it is to use. This is a different take on that. The ease of a normal Hela deck, like where it's just, oh, everything works for me. I have Scar for the 7, I have Death for the 8, all my cards discard a card, and then I play Hela, and it's a bunch of power, and then I win. This is a much more intricate deck that is honestly much less of a Hela deck. Is that about right?
Yeah, I'd consider it to be more of like a Corvus ramp deck. The Hela, you don't really need it. It's nice because it justifies the Corvus, and in my opinion, the way that you can make a good ramp deck in this game is you have to justify the way that you're ramping into cards. And I think Corvus is probably the best way to do that right now because it also enables the Hela. So it's more of a sideline, yeah.
Just to like sort of expand on that a little bit for people who don't understand, that sort of means like when you're playing an Electro deck, justifying the way you play Electro is like, I'm going to blink this Electro into something else. In this case, justifying the Corvus is, I'm going to bring back the stuff I discard, I get the energy, I still get the stuff. So, thinking of this as a Corvus first deck, then, what would you say to someone who has never played this deck and they're looking at it and they're like, what the Odin doing? What is all this crap?
So I've always said the best way to learn the list is to watch it, but I'm going to do my best to explain what you should be thinking about here. Um, Traditionally in Marvel Snap, you're trying to play on curve, you're trying to maximize your energy to power, get as much power on the board at like a reasonable rate. You kind of just want to throw all that out the window. This game doesn't play like Marvel Snap. This game plays like I'm going to try to cheese my opponent and win however I can. So that's things like Legion, that's things like filling a lane, and then on turn 6, blinking the Jubilee into Gorr. And so now they just aren't ready for that. It's all sorts of stuff like that. And the easiest way to do that, I think, in general, is extra energy. Because when you're playing extra energy, you're just able to do things that your opponent can't even dream of. Like, one line that you can do is if you play a Corvus, you can play Hela on 5, which is basically bringing back a massive amount of power that you would expect from a normal Hela deck, but on turn 5. So then you can play like Gambit Ghost Rider or something ridiculous like Blade Blink and then blink into an Infinite 27 power on the last turn. You aren't necessarily trying to take the linear play lines that you would with every other deck, and I think it's really important to keep that in mind.
The thing that I think you're probably most famous for among high elo players is your laser targeted gambits. And I think that this gambit, like as a deck, this deck makes use of gambit in ways that I think are rarely seen by other decks. There's like setups that involve, after you've Corvus, you get Gambit and Hela in the same lane, and then you Odin that, or like Gambit and Jubilee in a lane, and then you Odin that. Things like that, Gambit and Blink in a lane, doing a bunch of work repetitively. That's the kind of stuff that makes this such a mid-range crusher to me. Like, yes, you have all of these big numbers that come out of there or whatever, right? But also, if your opponent is relying on, like, I'm going to play a good card on turn 3 and then a good card on turn 4, blowing up 2 of those cards is such a meaningful setback, and you just don't pay any cost for it because you bring your cost paid right back.
Yeah, of course. I do want to talk a little bit more about Gambit because I think it's really interesting and important how it works in this list. So, Gambit is almost functioning as a tech card in the list because one of the problems Hela's always had is, oh shoot, they have a 140 power Black Panther. What am I going to do? Whereas Gambit kind of solves that a little bit. You can not always hit it, but if you play at turn 5, you're not actually losing any cubes for trying. And I think that relates to the overall almost design philosophy of the deck, where this is almost cheating ahead a little bit to something we'll talk about later. But I'm not trying to win the Marvel Snap game when I'm playing this list. I'm trying to increase my chance of winning the Marvel Snap game when I'm playing this list. I'm never playing to win. I'm playing to probably win later. So an example of that is if I play Gambit on 3, which is what you're talking about. A lot of people know me for Gambit on 3, Snap, you have to leave. If I play Gambit on 3 and it's a 1 and 3 to hit, I don't know, what's a 2 cost that it's important? Fenris
Scream.
Wolf?
Sure.
Scream? If I shoot your Scream on the 3rd turn and then I snap, you have to leave. So what just happened there, let's say there's 2 cards on the board. I took a 50-50. One option, I win instantly, and the other option, we just keep playing. That seems like pretty good odds to me. And I
Yeah.
think that Gambit is important in continuing that throughout the rest of the deck does it too, but Gambit does it really well.
One of the things I really like about this deck, and it's related to what you just brought up, is like how it plays with the snap system, where
Mm-hmm.
this is a probability deck. This is a let's take this 67% chance, and then, if I'm right about my math, one of the things that having this scale of points in your deck means is that a lot of the time your guesstimations of your percentages are just correct, right? Like if you have a Gorr and an Infinite in your deck, and you're like, I need to hit the Gorr or the Infinite, and if I do, I win. You're not going to be wrong about winning when you do that a lot. And I think one of the things that other decks have is like, you estimate that it's a 50-50, but it isn't a guaranteed 50-50 or something like that. Whereas this deck is so large and black and white with destruction and things of that nature that you are very easily able to like make informed probability calls.
Yeah, and especially with things like Blink, where it's okay, I've got 3 cards in my deck. One's Jubilee, one is Odin, one is Hela. Your opponent sees, okay, they've got 3 cards in their deck. Unless they have Hela in their hand, they're gambling. Whereas if you think about it, what's actually happening is you play Blink. If that
It's
hits
guaranteed.
Jubilee,
Yeah.
it's almost guaranteed. Like it's not a 50-50, it's like
Yep.
3/4 or sometimes it's 7/8. And I think the fact that you have that knowledge and your opponent doesn't know what's happening because it's all hidden, that's probably one of the strongest parts of the deck.
Yeah, that like exact scenario comes up a lot where like you're playing against this and you're like, oh, it pulled the exact thing that was needed. But there are so many combinations of cards in deck that are just the exact thing you need. Like it's very, very redundant in that way where it's like, okay, it's the exact thing that was necessary, but also they were very likely to get it. And it doesn't look like they were very likely to get it. And so that means that people stay when they shouldn't.
Yeah, of course. I think the staying when they shouldn't is the biggest thing. The cube rate on this deck is ridiculous. If you can get this deck above like, I don't know, 45% win rate, and you know how to snap it, it's disgusting. I was just on a call with Smalls earlier, and we were just playing because we were just trying it out, having fun.
Yeah, he told
And
me that he just like farmed
we,
up to rank 3 testing that the bug didn't happen anymore. Great.
yeah, he accidentally climbed like 190 snap points because we got like medium lucky, medium to high lucky. It wasn't lucky, but it was like,
High
okay,
percentile.
we're not losing. Like we're not drawing any 3s by 3. And then you just win because you're drawing your cards. So like being able to snap it like that is very important. And I do want to get a little bit further into the snap philosophy of the deck in a little bit, but we
That was
can
going to be
get to
my
that
next
when we get there.
question. So just like do it now. That was going to be what I asked anyway, right? Like one of the things that I've noticed about playing you specifically is something I've also noticed when playing against Butt a lot, where it's like this leveraging of hidden information in your snaps, where it with him it's because he's playing like whatever wild piece of garbage he's playing, and you're just like, I don't know what that is. With this deck, it's because there are percentages that are available to you that are not available to me.
Of course, and I think snapping aggressively is very important with this list. It enables you to snap on 50/50s when okay, so the philosophy behind snapping on a 50/50 is actually pretty cool. I mentioned earlier that you're not playing to win with the deck, you're playing to maximize your chance of winning. And so what snapping on a 50/50 does is it encourages your opponent to retreat. So if you think about it, long term, in a 50/50, if you win the 50/50, nothing happened. Like that's the set because next time you're going to lose it. So you're going to go up and then come right back down. But if you snap on the 50/50, that adds a third option of your opponent leaving. So that's the only way you can truly win a 50/50 is if your opponent leaves. So it's very important to be able to bully snap. Sometimes it's important to boomer snap if you're on a 50/50, because if you boomer snap, people tend to leave if they think they're screwed. Whereas sometimes the true odds are like 50%. Being able to weaponize snapping like that is definitely important for sure.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of this deck is built around picking up value on the floor where people leave it, if that makes any sense. Like
Mhm.
it's a deck building philosophy of, yes, I'm weaponizing randomness, but what I'm actually weaponizing is your fear of it.
Yeah, of course. It's also not necessarily just that, because I think the easiest climbs are the ones where I queue into people that are like, oh shoot, he's running Odin, or wait, the Hela deck has Legion, and then I just get 8 cubes. That's the easiest way to climb.
Yeah.
Honestly, you've kind of ruined that for me, KM, because now
You're
everyone knows I run
welcome?
Legion.
Yeah,
No, everyone knows
good.
I have Legion.
Good.
I have to play fair now.
Yeah. Blade is a card that, when added to the Hela deck, is maybe the card that is the most responsible for Hela becoming a thing, capital A, capital T, with this targeted discard. What is it about this card and how you use it that makes it so powerful in the list?
Well, in this list specifically, Blade is super important because it is your only targeted discard. And being able to choose what you discard is a little bit more powerful than not being able to choose. Like, I'd rather discard the Infinite than the Hela personally. That's just a personal preference, though. Um, Blade himself is really cool, though, because not only are you targeting it not by cost, not by power, so it can be anything. You can, like, Blade a Legion, which it's the only easy way to discard Legion, really, other than, I guess, Swordmaster, but that doesn't really, no one runs Swordmaster. You can not only do that, but you can also kind of fill it in your curve whenever you want. So, like, if you have 6 energy on turn 5, you can play Blade Blink. And now, not only did you discard a card for your turn 6 Hela or your turn 6 Ghost Rider, you've also blinked the Blade into like a potential Gambit, a potential Ghost Rider, a potential Gorr, Infinite, all sorts of options.
Yeah, the play that always catches me off guard is I'll forget that there's 7 energy, and then I'll get like Blade Hella'd, and I'll be calculating for like a normal Hela, and it'll be like, oh, right, they have 1 extra energy, that's 20 extra power. My bad. Like, and that is the thing that comes up a lot with Blade, where it's like, because this deck is so clunky, you can kind of weave it into your curve wherever.
And another really important thing about Blade that a lot of people make that haven't like watched the deck be played correctly ever, do not ever play it on 1. There's exactly one situation where you should ever Blade on 1 in this list, and it's when you're discarding an Odin and you have Ghost Rider in hand and you do not have Corvus and you do not have Hela. That is the only and you don't have Gambit. That is the only situation you should ever play Blade on 1 or 2. And the reason for that is because you don't want your Corvus to have increased odds of hitting Hela. I'd rather Corvus with 5 cards in hand than 3.
This is a flex spot between Iron Patriot and Infinity Ultron. Two cards that, frankly, could not be more different. Infinity Ultron leaning you further into a combo aspect with the Wong Stone and a bunch of other weird stuff. Plus, he does key off of being ramped out on turn 4, which you are able to do with Corvus. Iron Patriot, a much safer option. Walk me through the thought process behind them in parallel.
So the reason I like Iron Patriot in this spot specifically is because not only does it give you the only play really in the game, except arguably Valentina, that you actually want to play on two. So you're like actually playing cards early, which is kind of important. You also get a lot of extra like snap equity. If you're playing against Destroy, and this doesn't happen very often, but if you do get Null, that's 8 cubes. You're going to win 8 cubes. If you don't, you made a mistake. Like he can just unlock cubes, and he also gives you another target for your Corvus to hit in your hand. So it doesn't have the playing the blade early issue of making your Corvus more likely to hit other things you don't want it to, because you're replacing it with, let's say, a 4 cost. If I discard a 4 cost, I'm not upset about it. Like I'm not gonna complain if I discard my Atuma. Like it'll come back with Hela later. That's fine, and it fills your curve really well. Regarding filling the spot with other cards, Infinity Ultron, I actually think is a little bit better. And because it does the same thing that Iron Patriot does, except later and better. This is a ramp deck, of course, so you want to be ramping into really powerful 5 drops. And I think the two best 5 drops in the game to ramp into right now are Legion and Infinity Ultron, sorry. And I don't really think it's close. And so being able to do both of those options, you kind of lose all your low rolls. You can't really low roll if you have both. Like you're gonna draw one of them.
Yeah, the thing about this that I really want to get out in front of is I don't have Infinity Ultron in here because you specifically asked me to not put Infinity Ultron in here because he's really complex and hard to explain, and the deck is already arcane enough, and you don't want to dive into dive into like a book and come out with like a long wizard beard and then not actually like be able to implement this information in practice. So to people who are watching this who have never played this deck before, probably play IP.
Of course, IP's way easier. And I'm not just saying that because I've played it for a year or 6 months or whatever. I think I haven't even got the hang of it yet. Like it is hard. That card is ridiculous. Just the potential it has.
I feel like this guy's kind of like the mascot of the deck. What he is what the deck is. He is the almost the spiritual heart of this list. You just play this guy on 3 when you don't have Corvus, right?
Yeah, he gets played on 3 a lot when you don't have Corvus. Sometimes he gets played on 3 when you do have Corvus. If your opponent's playing like a Fenris Wolf, I would rather play the Gambit than the Corvus. I'll just shoot the dog. No offense to any dogs, I guess.
No
That
one
cannot.
was thinking that.
That's horrible. I would not. I
Now
do
we
not
are
condone.
thinking that though.
I do
Like
not condone shooting dogs. That is not what I meant.
your
But
denial
yeah,
in this way.
Gambit is very nice in the list. He solves one of Hela's biggest problems, which once again, you need to be able to deal with combo decks that go over you, while also, supplementing your game plan being discarding a card. And we already have all the infrastructure in the deck built up to not care what it discards. Being a 3 cost and a ramp deck is really good because you can play 2 of them on 5, sorry, turn 5. So you can go like Gambit Corvus, Gambit IU Blade, and then the really important play line is being able to play him on turn 6, reaching lanes that your opponent doesn't think you can by blowing up their cards, while also playing a massive Jubilee, a massive Ghost Rider, even with like a Blade and a Corvus, that's 8 power in another lane. You're playing 11 power on the last turn, which is like slightly worse than a 6 drop, while also having the interaction of blowing up something on the other side of the board.
The other thing I wanted to dive in on Gambit is like specifically in conjunction with Odin and Ghost Rider. This is a card where positioning can matter a lot. Do you have any positioning tips for like if you played a Gambit, don't play other stuff in the lane kind of thing?
Gambit should be the first card in any lane pretty much, and the reason for that is because about 2 years ago, they ruined all my fun and made it so that you need to have cards in your hand in order to destroy cards on the other side of the board. So if you play the Gambit after Corvus, which often you do, you cannot play it in the Corvus lane unless you're planning on blinking it. If you're planning on blinking it, it doesn't really matter. But if you're going to Odin it, then it's not going to do anything. Like, it's not going to destroy any cards unless you throw it in its own lane.
You've described this deck as a Corvus ramp deck, and I think that is roughly accurate, where like what this deck is actually doing is Corvus into 5-drop, into 6-drop, figure out the rest, right? Like get ahead, stay ahead, do something stupid with all your energy, but fundamentally you are still going to be like, I'll just play a Gorr on turn 5, and that's what this guy lets me do.
Yeah, of course. And I think a really technical thing that a lot of people don't think about is this is actually Hela's other major issue. I think Hela has three main problems as a card that she has to solve in deck building. One of them is combo decks. One of them is being able to manage your board in a way that the randomness doesn't matter that much. And the third one is being able to ramp ahead of things. You don't want to get Juggernaut Cosmode on turn 6. You don't want to get Eliath on turn 6. If you're playing Corvus, you can just get out before the Eliath, and then if you play Hela on 5, you're gonna have Prio on 6. You have to deal with like Shang and stuff, but it's not as big of a problem. But yeah, Corvus being able to ramp like that, like I said, I think he is the best ramp card in the game right now, just because he is able to do his thing as well as someone else's thing. And I think that that is very powerful.
Jubilee Blink is one of the sort of combo deck staples of Marvel's Snap. Are they doing anything special here thanks to stuff like Odin? Jubilee especially is very relevant in that context.
Of course, Jubilee does two main things here. She's the deck well, three main things technically. She thins your deck, which is important because when you're playing Blink, you're able to have better odds because instead of having 3 cards in the deck on the last turn, you only have 2. You need to be able to supplement your Hela, which is the deck thinning. You're more likely to get your Hela. She functions as her own stat stick. Sometimes she is just a 421, and your opponent does just kind of have to hold that you have 20 power on the 4th turn. Another thing she does really well is function as a blink target. So you'll be able to play her on 4 if you don't Corvus, and then you can blink her. And now you did your Hela on 5, you just did it a little bit differently. Or you have an Infinite on the board. Or if it pulls like a Gambit, you blink it into an Odin. You've now Gambited twice by turn 5. So your opponent's board is just kind of gone. There's a lot of things she can do that are very important.
Probably the thing that I first noticed was weird about your list was the Ghost Rider inclusion. It is one of the few lists that is using Ghost Rider in a sort of meaningful way, which is to say, in large part because this is not a Hela list, it wants to have that redundancy in Corvus recovery, right?
Yeah, of course. I think Ghost Rider is very important to be able to salvage your Hela. But if you think about it, the Ghost Rider doesn't actually need to pull the Hela. If you Corvus and it hits your Infinite and your Hela, most people would say, oh shoot, I lost my Infinite and my Hela. Or Gorr's a better example. Now you can't play your Gorr. If you Ghost Rider and it doesn't pull your Hela, that means it pulled your Gorr. And so now you've played a 4-5 with a Gorr. That's pretty good. That
Yep.
is okay. And it also functions as a second Hela. So even if you don't discard your Hela, if you discard your Blade, for example, and then you Hela your Blade, and your Blade comes back, now you can Ghost Rider turn 6, and let's say you bladed, I don't know, Blink, you can play Gambit, and then Ghost Rider. Ghost Rider will either revive whatever you Gambited, or it'll revive your Blink, which will blink your Gambit into, I don't know, Infinite or Odin, and then the Odin's on the Hela, and then everything goes crazy. There's a lot of really powerful things Ghost Rider does. He's not necessarily just here for redundancy. He functions as almost padding for your draw. You don't need to draw your Hela anymore if you have Ghost Rider.
The weird, like, final turn Gambit Ghost Rider, but like it gets a blink kind of stuff, where like all of that stuff is what I think about when I think about this deck. Like that's the thing that is the eternal image of this deck in my mind is just like you go into turn 6 expecting something, and then what actually happens is like 4 cards that weren't on the board are now on the board. Several cards that were on the board are not on the board. And I had no idea that that was going to happen, but you did. This might come as a surprise to my audience, but Blink is one of my favorite cards in the game. I think she's phenomenally powerful. I think she does a bunch of strong stuff, and I think it actually sucks that she's sort of locked into combo decks as it is. I miss when we were doing like blinking leeches into Red Hulks and stuff, and that was like a good mid-range thing. I really do. But as is, it's only the combo sickos that get to enjoy her power, and it is a very, very high power level, correct?
Oh, she's insane. This card is ridiculous. I think this is in contention for possibly top 2 5-drops in the game. She's absurd. Blink is basically her own win condition. You're able to justify the cards in your hand using Hela, and then you're able to justify the cards in your deck using Blink and Jubilee. So now every single card in your deck and your hand is justified and can enter the board at any moment. And you basically get so much more control with Blink than you do with Hela. Blink just lets you go crazy. You could do a lot of cheese strategies with Blink, like Jubileeing in closing its own lane, and then blinking it into an Odin, and now there's 7 power over there your opponent wasn't ready for. You can do all sorts of wacky play lines. One of the things you can do with Blink that I think is one of the most underrated things you can do in any deck is Blink herself. So if you play Blink on 5 and blink your Jubilee, you can then Odin the Blink, and Blink's actually going to blink. So now your Infinite's on the board, your Odin's on the board. So you're either blinking the Blink into Gorr or Hela. One of those options is broken, and the other one is stupid. So there's
Which
kind
one
of
is
no losing with
which
that
out
play
of
line. I
just
think Gorr is kind of dumb, man. He's kind of broken. I
wait,
think
no. Oh, wait, no. One of them is broken. One of them is stupid. You can't say Gorr is dumb and broken. They're separate.
you could be dumb and broken.
Which one is which? Which one is dumb? Which one is broken?
Hela is just stupid, man. I don't know why that card is in this game.
Now that one is stupid. This is impossible to figure out.
Gorr's broken. Gorr should not be a
There we
637.
go. There we go.
There you go.
Yeah, I feel that way too. And then I look at his win rate and it's just like so bad. And I think it's because his appeal is so strong that people play all sorts of terrible Gorr decks just to justify doing what he does. Like he's so clearly a strong card, but also statistically, he just never has the win rate to justify it, even though he's like the top end de jour in all sorts of like whatever ridiculous combo garbage is happening, whether it's Mr. Negative or this. It's just like, well, here's a Gorr. You're playing, Esme and Anti-Venom. Here's a Gorr. Like, whatever it is, he's the guy.
I do want to push back a little bit on the concept of combo decks. I think it's really important to differentiate between a combo deck and a ramp deck
Sure.
because I think the main difference is in a good combo deck, you have a couple things that you want to do, and they're very set play lines, and if you do them, you win. Whereas in ramp decks, we don't have a lot of really good ramp decks, and I think that is actually I think ramp hasn't hit its potential yet. I've got this really cool Moon Girl ramp list coming out soon that I'm gonna be working on, and I'm very excited for that. But I think we could do a lot more with the ramp archetypes than we
Ramp,
have with like mid range.
yeah. Ramp sort of exists in a weird spot where it's like a little bit smaller than the combo decks, but big enough to bully the mid-range decks. And that means that, like, in theory, it should be a good spot. The issue is that when you look at a deck like this, what it's doing is supplementing the ramp, which kinda sucks, with free dudes. It's like, we can't just be ramping and blinking and jubileeing. We also need a free Gorr. We also need a bunch of Hela stuff, right? And so the reason we need that is so that we can guaranteed beat up the mid-range decks. That's like the sort of premise, right? But like it's hard for other ramp decks to get off the ground because they don't have that natural inroad to Hela the way Corvus does.
Of course, but I don't actually think that's necessarily the whole problem, because if you look at things like Arishem was very, very strong for a period of time. It's not necessarily as strong anymore, but that is objectively a ramp deck. And it doesn't necessarily have a free Gorr. It doesn't necessarily get a Mockingbird every game. It's very rare for it to get a Mockingbird. It's doing the same thing, except you don't have the 037. and I think Erisham didn't necessarily need it. So I think if we had more deck builders purely focused on ramp, I actually do think ramp has the potential to flourish.
I don't know. I'm a bit of a hella truther, but I've been wrong before. Legion. This is just a card that's pretty stupid to play on 4. That's like the extent of it, right? Where it's like, A, people don't expect Hela to have a Legion. B, you can get location screwed pretty easily. But C, if you like ramp into a Legion and you need 5 drops not just so you can ramp into them, but also because Hela revives one of each cost now, it's just a nice thing to have.
Yeah, of course. I think Legion is probably one of the most underrated cards in the game. You're getting so much location control, so much cheese value, so much cheating value. And if you think about it, I actually think Hela is the best home Legion's ever had, because all of her high rolls are things like Elysium, where, okay, I Legion Elysium. Now I have 3-cost Odin, 0-cost Gambit. I Gambit 3 times on the last turn and revive all my cards with Hela. What now? How do you beat that? Like, if you Legion things like Death's Domain, it's I can play cards, you can't, good game. If you Legion things like Kiln, that can be a little bit scarier, but you know what's happening and they don't. So sometimes you can just win off that. You could do things like Legioning Monster Island against Thanos, which is a really niche secret that I'm letting slide here. If you Legion Monster Island against Thanos, and then you Odin the Legion, their board's already full and yours
Yeah,
isn't.
they are
So
definitely full.
you win the game. There's so many locations like that where Hela just thrives with the card.
Okay, so dumb and broken. Gorr the God Butcher. Just the biggest idiot in the game, yes?
Well, Gorr's interesting actually because he is the biggest idiot. Against Thanos, he is 37 power. Thanos is not winning the Gorr lane unless you play it on 5, which is what you're often looking to do, and it's why I actually think Gorr is replaceable in this deck where Legion isn't. Gorr can be replaced by things like Hulkling, Magneto, Giganto, any big guy, because his problem is he dies to every tech card in the game, whereas the other ones don't necessarily. There was a period where I was running Enchantress and Hela, and I can't run Enchantress and Hela if I'm running Gorr. That's just not going to work.
So the queen herself, Hela, is here. How much of this deck is really about her? Just ballparking it, because I think a lot of people, when they see this video, will think of this as a Hela deck. So I want you to use this as a chance to sort of disabuse them of that notion.
I think Hela is about half the deck, because like I said, you need to be able to justify your hand, and you need to be able to justify the deck. And I think Blink is the other half. Hela is very, very good. Don't get me wrong. I think in the list, Hela is obviously best in slot. I don't think it's replaceable. I think you could call it a Hela deck and not be entirely wrong, but it's not necessarily the most important thing that you're doing. There's a lot of games where I discard Hela and I don't care that I don't get her back. There's a lot of games where I don't draw her and I don't try to draw her. There's a lot of games where you're just doing the ramp thing and Hela's here too, kind of watching. And your opponent also has to respect the threat of Hela, which is a lot scarier than she actually is in this deck. Because in this deck, she's reviving 1, 2 cards. Whereas if you're in your opponent's head, it's like, oh my god, she's going to put 50 power in every lane. There's going to be an Iron Man. We're going to lose. So
Yeah.
it's a lot more fear factor nowadays, but she still does her thing.
Yeah, the weird thing about playing against this deck is you keep thinking Hela's gonna do something stupid. It just brings back like an Odin and a Gambit, and you're like, oh, I mean, like that's not bad. It's just like it's not Hela. It like I'm put in mind. I don't know if this is a reference anyone's gonna get. There's like the girl on TikTok, Sabrina Breer, who does like that friend videos, and there's this really famous video she does where she just like looks at, she's like, oh, like this sort of like faux surprise thing. That's what I think of every time a Hela gets played against me in this list. You're like, you expect it to be the worst thing on earth, and then it happens, and you're like, oh, like, and then when they like, you put the Hela in the Corvus lane and then Odin that lane, then it gets stupid again, right? But you have to like kind of go through some hoops to make it as stupid as you would expect it to be.
Another thing that I think is a little bit important to acknowledge is if your Hela is reviving a Gambit and an Odin, that's not bad. The Gambit can revive first, and then the Odin can land on the Gambit and trigger it twice. The Odin can land on the Hela and revive whatever the Gambit discarded. none of that can happen, and you can play Ghost Rider next turn because you're playing Hela on 5. It's even the low rolls with Hela, they don't feel that bad. She's still doing her thing.
This guy might be the trickiest card in the deck. Can you just run through a couple of the interactions you're going to have to think of when you have this guy? Either because one of the things about this deck that I think makes it uniquely powerful is that it's just putting a bunch of cards in different zones that you have access to. And you've talked about that, right? This is a card that you have access to the cards that you've discarded. You have access to the cards in your deck. You have access to the cards in your hand. That's part of what makes it function. Odin is a card that sort of bridges all of those things.
Yeah, I think Odin is one of the most underrated cards in this deck. It's kind of ridiculous what you can do with this thing. You can Odin your Gambit. You can pull Odin with Jubilee, and now the Jubilee's bigger than the opponent could have possibly thought it was going to be. You can Odin your Jubilee manually, and now there's one card in your deck at the end of the game. You can Odin your Blink. You can Odin your Hela. You can Odin your Corvus and your Hela. You can Odin your Blink and your Hela, and then Blink a Gambit, or like a Blade even. If you play Blink and then Hela, you're on turn 6 now. You play Blade in one lane and then Odin the Blink and Hela. You're going to watch this Blade, and then you're going to Blink the Blade into Corvus or Gambit, discard more cards, and then trigger the Hela. That line is one most people don't know about. You can Odin Ghost Rider to get another revived card and like fish for Hela almost. There's just so many things that you really don't think of until you get your hands on the deck.
He big. Is there anything else this guy's doing?
He big. That's about it.
It's gotta, yeah, he big.
One thing that's nice about Infinite compared to Gorr is the only tech card he's actually scared of is Shang. And some people don't run Shang. So sometimes there is just 20 power on the board and they have to hold that.
All right. Thank you so much to Denish for joining us today. Do you have anything you want to promote? Are you going to start streaming anytime soon? I know you said you would. Will it actually happen, and where can people find you?
I do think I'm going to start streaming on Twitch soon. I've been super busy recently, so I haven't been able to, but over the summer, my schedule opens up quite a bit. So you can find me on Twitch. I'll just be at Denish. We just have fun. I'm probably just going to gamble on stream. That's what I enjoy. Other than that, I just want to...
YouTube for legal reasons. This is purely referring to cubes. You cannot like that. Legally not actionable. Denish, thank you for joining me and for getting me demonetized. It has been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Do you have any final words for the audience?
Final words. I just want to encourage people to deck build more. I think that you learn so much about the game from deck building. I think that's the most important skill you can learn. I know this is against
I want to
Cam's
encourage
motive,
people to net deck more. I want to encourage people to watch my videos more. Okay? I don't want...
Yeah. All right.